Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar. Today we're going to look at a book. I know it's written in Hebrew. This is called the Tanya, and let me explain what it is. The Tanya is the basic work of Chabad Hasidim, and it was written about 200 years ago, and this great Rabbi Shneur Zalman, wrote many advice to people, not just to be holy. Of course, as a rabbi, is also called like a teacher. And listen, face it, many people have the same kind of issues like everybody else does. Sometimes they are unique. For the most part, everybody has their general problems. It's health. I mean, the different health problems, of course, but health and making a living and trouble with the kids. These are major issues. Today we're going to talk more deeper philosophy, not practical, but that's also important for a person, because you have to have a theological attitude. Where is God? Who is God? How is He creating the world? Is He really here? Talk about listening to our prayers and our needs. Is He really tuned in? Does He really care about us? These are all very important questions that every thinking person really should have. We're going to talk about just a little bit about, I can't talk about all those subjects, of course, in 1.5 hours, but in our little show here, we're going to tune in to one specific issue, and that is how God created the world. I mean, it's big. It obviously takes more than a half hour to discuss the subject fully, but we'll try to get in and condense it into a half hour. This book of Tanya, like I say, the first part was written about it, practical advice for everybody, and the second part, it's all in one book here, one sefer. It's called Shar Yichud V'Emunah, the Gate of Unity and Faith, which the idea that God is everywhere. Of course, basic Judaism, everybody knows the definition, that it's monotheistic. Mono means one. Shema Yisrael, Shem Echad, you say, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord is one. So it's very much that we're always talking about there's one God in the world, but again, you look around and you say, hey, where is God? I don't see Him. If He's everywhere, He's one, that means He's right here. If He's right here, then I should be able to see Him. I should be able to tune in or feel Him. But I don't. So isn't that proof positive that He's not here? Well, that's many people's philosophy in life, and their conclusion is that, not only that you're not tuned into God, but you see evil in God. God is totally good, and you say, well, people are dying, there's the Holocaust, etc. Everybody knows there's problems in the world, or their own personal problems. So you say God is good, He is everywhere. How does He allow such good to be in the world? Well, that's a very good philosophical question, but first of all, we have to start right from the beginning of how did God create the world? If He's all one, and we know, look, we see trees, we see people, there's 7 billion people in the world. We're not Siamese twins. We're all separate human beings, separate minds. The Talmud actually says every person has a separate attitude. We're not twins. We all have different ideas in the world. We have different feelings in our heart. So where is the oneness, and how did the one God make the world? So that's really the issue that the second part of Tanya is trying to explain to us. And it's interesting. It's of course it's Jewish because it's monotheism, but it's really one idea that even the non-Jews, whoever they are, could really learn and appreciate and understand this idea, because of course the non-Jews are not supposed to worship idols. They don't have to be Jewish, of course. We don't force that on anybody. There are converts, but no one is forced to be Jewish, to say the least, and we accept everybody who they are. But they do have to live a moral and ethical life. That's upon us, to every human being, to see that everybody is living morally. So this idea also, not only on a practical issue, which I said about the Jewish people, but even spiritually, that's an important component in a person's life. Every person, no matter who they are, is understanding, hey, where is God? How does He relate to me? And so on. So that's important for every human being. It's in the Tanya, going through it, not word by word, but idea by idea. And again, I mean, I try to bring everything down into a half hour, which maybe is a little too much to I'm biting off too much that I can chew. But in any case, it starts saying with a sense in Devarim and Deuteronomy, put it to your heart that Havaya is Elohim. This is very important because you do see many names of God. Now, if you read in the English, it's God is the Lord, and that's the same name. But on the other hand, in Hebrew, there are different names, and names connotate many different things. For example, me or you or any person could say, hey, if someone calls me dad, that's my children, then I'm going to relate to them that specific way as a father. And my wife calls me a husband, calls me my name, I'm going to relate to her differently. Well, did I change? On the one hand, I'm a father, and again, you can go further. You're an employer. You explain, you relate to employees differently, and then you yourself have a boss, on and on. There's so many people you relate to in a totally different way. Are you changed? Are you a different person? The person who came out of his house with his family and now he goes to business? No, you're the same person, but the name or the character changes on who you're relating to. So it's the same idea, and if you can accept that, understand that example, that there's the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the special name of God. And that's the name of God that connotates, using the Hebrew Hoya Hava Vayia Kiechad, past, present, and future like one. It means above time, above place, beyond everything. And a lot of times that you say that he's the God of mercy. But that's now he's saying that who Elohim, there's the name of God that's called Elohim. And that is, if we use numerical value, Elohim is Hateva, nature, and that's the God force that is creating the world around us. So there's two different, the transcendental God, and there's the God in the world. But the news here in this sentence, in this pasuk, is that Havaya hu Elohim, that they are the same. So this is a very interesting idea that compares and contrasts to other religions, because other religions accept there's a powerful God, and they look around us, and we may have different definitions of evil, and that people that they don't believe like them, for example, they may be evil. But how do you deal with that? If God is all powerful, how do you deal with the world or evil? Because Judaism is very unique, and like I said before, it's of course monotheistic, and therefore Havaya is Elohim, that the God that is creating the world, that's all powerful, is the God of nature. It's a very, very deep idea, and we're going to see a little bit how he can bring himself down. And he says that God is Elohim in the heavens above and on the earth below. And he asks an interesting question. How can you have a God down here and below? No one thinks that God is below the ground. How can you understand this idea? What does that mean? And he brings out another idea from the Psalms, Tehillim, and its explanation of the Baal Shem Tov, who lived around 250 years ago, was the founder of the Hasidic movement. And the statement is as follows, the sentence: your words that you spoke that are always standing in the heavens. Now, what does that mean? Meaning, we have to go back to the idea of the creation. How did even just basic Bible, Chumash, how did God create the world? He created the world and he spoke. It doesn't say God made the world. He spoke. He's constantly speaking in the world. And again, what we said before, the name Elohim, again, it may be hard to see it in English, but in the Hebrew, and that's very important. People always say you lose something in translation, which I think is for sure the idea that you would get from the Bible understanding, that Elohim, the God of nature, that he spoke. He's always speaking, creating the world. He's not making the world, he's speaking. So how do you speak? You communicate with letters, with words. And Hebrew is not just called Ivrit, the Hebrew language, but in the Bible it's called Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language, because God spoke. And that's why if God spoke that language, that is the holiest of language, the original language. Now he spoke with many different letters, many different words. Words are made out of letters. But again, just sometimes they have these kind of games where, here's 7 letters, how many words can you make out of them? Scramble and descramble them. It's the same thing that they use here, that if you scramble up, even though there's only 22 letters, there's 26 letters in the English alphabet, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph Beis, that if you scramble them up, and it's very interesting because I know people can't believe it, that you can make trillions of different combinations. 22 letters, how many can you have? So of course, let's take a break for a cute little story, and everybody loves a story. So this goes back 1,000 years ago in the Persian Empire, and many times in these empires that they had Jewish advisors. If you see even in the Bible times with Daniel, the prophets, the later prophets, they were advisors. The kings appreciated, they were smart, intelligent, and they used them as advisors. So this was later on under Persian Empire, and they had a Jewish advisor. And he did him a good favor, and he was a very righteous person, and he helped the kingdom out. He says, I want to give you a special reward. What can I give you? And he says, well, and he was very smart, as we said, and they had a chessboard, because they like playing chess. Of course, as we all know, that's 8 by 8. We mean there's 64 squares on the chessboard. He says, you give me 1 kernel of wheat, and you just double it every square 64 times. So man, he was thinking, making $10. They didn't have dollars in the Persian. Hey, you want a nice reward from a rich, hey, how about $1 million? There's some of these lobbyists and these big officials get over here, big highfalutin lawyers. Why you want a little kernel, 1 kernel, and double it? Come on, what am I going to end up with? A bag of wheat? Big deal. Well, it's a little mathematical game, which you can obviously do it by yourself. That it seems like nothing, and that's why it was a little bit of a trick. But you double every time times 64. By the time you're up to the 64th, you're million and billions of kernels. You keep on doubling, obviously 2 to 4 to 8, and at first it's again nothing, but you do that 64 times, not just like I just did 3-4 times. You could obviously do it yourself, and how what you eventually get. So that's why it's a little bit, it's not a trick, it's the truth. It's just a mathematical formula that if you take 22 letters and you keep scrambling them, and you have like even combinations of 10, how many combinations can you make? Well, I'll give you a homework if you like your math, and you do get almost to trillions, I can tell you that, to trillions of combinations. And it seems like nothing, like I said, what's 22 letters, just like my example of the 1 kernel, but it turns out to be an incredible amount of words, which means everything in this is very, very important. Every creation in the world, bar none, because everything has to be created from God, has to have a life force. Now, this is very beautiful because every individual, surely human being, but like I said, every leaf has to have their own small smidgen of life force in the world. It may be small, but I say smidgen because it's enough to keep the animal or the vegetable growing. Very much on the other hand, that compared to God, that's what I'm trying to bring out. Compared to God, what is a leaf? What is a tree? Like I say, that's what I mean by a smidgen compared to what real life force is. We can talk about that a little bit more also, the finite, almost infinitesimal godliness that we are in tune with compared to the infinite God who creates everything. In any case, it's very interesting that everything has to have his life force. Now he makes his point, and it's very, very interesting. He says, therefore, even every rock, meaning now, you say a human being surely is alive, an animal is alive, a tree or any vegetation is alive, they're growing. But what's a rock? So it's very, very interesting when people say, that they're in tune with nature. And here Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, says, based on this idea, that even a rock is alive. Well, I mean, what's your definition of alive? It's being created. It has its own life force. So even though, like we say, surely human being, animals, vegetables, but even something inanimate, like a rock, has actually a life force that's giving it life. This is very interesting, because that makes us so in tune with nature and the world around us. Many times, we've had many times people on the show, and they're coming from ecological groups, and they're into nature, shouldn't hurt the trees, shouldn't hurt the world. I says, Judaism said this hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. So this is not just New Age that I'm telling you that let's be in tune with the world, what many people are nowadays. But this is even thousands of years ago. Like I said, it's Kabbalah, it's Jewish mysticism that goes back for forever, really, since human beings, teaching them that surely you don't kill human beings, you just don't shoot animals for the fun of it, and you don't just plow under trees and then pluck trees and deforest forests for nothing, and you just even take care of the dirt in the ground, because it's all part of God's creation. It's very nice to say that, but you see what we're trying to do here, trying to explain to any person that understands how the world has a form of godliness in them. So it's not just knocking down a tree, but there's a godly force in that tree. So everything has a life force in it, and that's very interesting. So if you use all these combinations of letters, you see that ultimately, that even though we do not see God, and we're trying to touch upon that in a few minutes, that we don't see godliness, God really is changing and the world. More like maybe you would say decoding. So if I would show you, even language is a code, let alone a secret code. But if I would show yourself, maybe you do know Chinese, I surely don't, a Chinese newspaper, I said, well, there's jiggle jaggles all over the place. Well, to a person who knows Chinese, that's a newspaper. It's telling you some important information. This paper, to me, it's just jiggle jaggles all over the place, just characters, cute little characters that's not telling me anything. So every language is, in a certain sense, decoding. And it's like you say, maybe people, when you were kids, you had a secret code, or surely the United States government, the military has their codes. So if you read them, it means nothing to you. If you know the secret code, to decodify it, then that's sometimes the most important information inside of that. So that's a very interesting idea. That's what we're, in a way, saying here. That if you look around the world, no God, there's no spirituality, I just see troubles in the world. That's the way you may be looking at it. But that's what we're trying to say. If you have the decoding and you can see things a little bit deeper, you'll see that there's godliness all over the world. And it takes a lot. It's not easy, but this is the key. This is the information that we're trying to give you to understand this. So now I just touch upon it, and like I say, it's just trying to condense these very deep thoughts in just a few minutes. But in any case, we're trying to say, if we do not see godliness, very fine and good that God's making it, but why don't we see God? And this is a very, very deep idea, and this is the deep answer to it. And that is that God has a power to create something out of total nothingness. We don't understand it. So even the greatest creation that we can have of man, let's say, is nuclear energy. So you're taking a uranium, meaning a rock. You're taking a rock of uranium, and you're making it to an incredible, incredible energy. Obviously, we sent 2 nuclear bombs over Japan. Nuclear energy, it's incredible. So that inside that hidden uranium, you see incredible, incredible. I mean, you have to have the means again how to do it. No, you're not going to hold a uranium rock. You're not going to make a nuclear bomb. Obviously, you have to know how to transfer from the rock into this incredible energy. So that means that in the world, it is also is from God, but it's hidden. We don't see it. We surely don't see it unless, again, you have fine-tuned eyes in order to understand it. On the other hand, that we're trying to, if you do have the means, if you are able to decipher, just like uranium, if you make a nuclear plant, that uranium, wow, this is powerful, this is going to give us some nuclear energy. Here also, that if we can decipher that the deeper level of godliness, we don't see it, but it's there. It's truly there. So the question is why we don't see it. That's the power of God also. It's just like there's the power of God to create something out of nothing, and scientists can create something out of something. They didn't make nuclear energy out of nothing. They made it out of a rock, transfer matter to energy. So that's obviously an incredible concept that made Albert Einstein the man of the century, last century. But it's true. It's the idea that matter goes to energy, and you can make energy into matter, but you're not making anything out of nothing. And what we're saying is that what God did was so incredible that no human being is able to make something out of absolute nothingness. And he did that. That's the world around us. So just like we say this is incredible, no human being could accomplish that, duplicate that at feet. It's maybe we could try to understand how that could happen, but we just very, very difficult. So too, we don't understand that that God can hide himself. What does it mean? Either you're in the room or you're not in the room. You can't be in the room and hidden at the same time. I see you. You're right there. You're standing in front of me. How can you talk to me and be there in front of me and now I cannot see you? Again, it's very, very impossible for a human being to be, for example, two places at one time. But for God, he can do that. He's called Yochel. You say it in Hebrew, omnipotent, that he could do anything that he wants, and that's something that he does. So he can create the world and be here through creation of the world, and at the same time, hey, where is he? I don't see him. Again, maybe if you have, it's not you can't see him, but you have to have the fine-tuned eyes in order to be able to, in the meditation, contemplation, the understanding to. But regular people, very intelligent people, just say there is no God in the world, and that's the reason he hides himself. And it's again a little story, the last few minutes that we have, but everybody loves the story, and I do too. So that the Baal Shem Tov, we talked about his name before a few minutes ago, the founder of Hasidism, actually said that everything in the world, because we just told you it is godliness, is a lesson of godliness. Why did God put you in this position? Why did he make it in such a way? It's a way to understand godliness. So he went into the forest, and very interesting. And again, that I know a lot of Orthodox Jews, or most of them live in the big cities, in New York City and Jerusalem, but there is something to love nature, like I said, and he loved nature. It's really God's creation. A building is very nice, and it shows how great human beings could be. Make a skyscraper, like I said, in New York City. On the other hand, there's a purity of nature that's straight from God. And he used to go into the forest and he used to meditate. And who was there? He saw a little kid on a log crying his heart out. Of course, you see a little kid crying. What's up? What's the problem? He said, I was playing with my friends hide and go seek. And I hid, and I had such a good hiding place that my friends couldn't find me. So I heard them talking. I didn't give myself away, and they just said, we cannot find them. It's getting late. Let's go home. We're tired of this game. We gave up. We look, we can't find them. And all my friends went home without me, and I'm sitting here all by myself, all alone without my friends. They gave up on me. The Baal Shem Tov, even it's a simple little children's story, that he said, this is remarkable. This is totally remarkable. This is exactly what God does. He hides himself, he wants to be hidden. He doesn't want to notice us. He doesn't care about it. These things are just not true at all. He does care about it, but he hides. He wants to see if we can find them, like a case of hide and go seek. And then he gets upset himself. He says, people say, I can't find them. I can't look for them. I don't see him. I don't feel him. I conclude there's no God. Forget it. I'm not going to search for him. And he gets very upset, and he wants us to look for him. He wants us to find him. That's a beautiful story. The same thing about God is hidden in the world. We say how God is really part of the world. He's creating the world. On the other hand, that he just makes just a very general statement that says, I want you to find me. That's the whole purpose of the world. So that's very, very important. And one concluding idea, even though that we just touched upon the subject, is that God is creating the world every second. Now you could say, he says, well, maybe he did create the world, and Judaism says over 5,000 years ago, but on the other hand, that maybe he made the world and he got bored, people say this, and he left the world. I'll grant you, it's such incredible creation, God had to create the world, but maybe he just gave up on it. I mean, look, a kid with a toy, it's a nice toy. Hey, it's boring, same old, let me get out of here, I'm done. He still has the toy, but he's left the room. So he answers this very briefly. The answer is that he gives an example of the splitting of the Red Sea. The splitting of the Red Sea, the wind constantly blew the waters to form a wall. And he says that if the wind would stop for a second, the water would fall from the wall and obviously gush down and drown the Jewish people, God forbid, and that would be the end of that. So what would happen is just that God had to keep the wind blowing in order to, just an example, if I keep this book on my lap, it could stay there for 100 years. If I lean it with my finger, it's leaning now, it's not flat, that's not a normal book, but if I remove my finger, it would go away and it would revert back to its former situation. So therefore, that's the same idea with the godliness in the world. You can't say God created the world thousands of years ago and now it's not, it's left by itself. The earth is rotating by itself like a dreidel atop. God's so strong that your dreidel you can do for a minute, and you can turn it for a minute, but God can do it for thousands of years. But you can't say that because the world's an anomaly. It cannot stay by itself. It cannot be created by itself, just like the book cannot stand by itself or lean by itself without my finger holding it. So the world cannot have the godliness in the world. It cannot stand without the godliness holding it up and creating it. So we brought out, just to summarize, a few ideas, beautiful ideas and very powerful ideas, but it was a very brief discussion about the idea of the unity of the world. There's more to talk about. I always say that because Torah is infinite, God's infinite. There's more to think about and discuss. And the main thing is that we learned about how God did create the world. He is creating the world, constantly creating the world. And even though that the person naturally would buck and say, hey, I don't see it, nevertheless, that is the power of God, that he can hold himself in and not create the world. He looks like he's not creating the world, even though he is creating the world. So I hope that this deep theological study is helpful to everybody to appreciate the oneness of God, and thank you very much.